Hi, this is Jason from Iracing Academy, and today we're going to talk about force feedback. What we need to do basically to get the best feeling from the vehicle we're driving in the virtual world, and things we need to do in order to achieve that. To understand force feedback, I just want to briefly mention what force is. So force is actually a unit strength that is applied and converted to actually a physical attribute, meaning whatever the simulation we're driving combined with the software built into the wheelbase actually gives us a certain movement, let's say unit strength, that is a representative of what is happening on the vehicle itself. In the real world, we're driving a vehicle which is a multi-body system, so it's basically a combined of wheels, tires, suspension, dampers, anti-roll bars, chassis, windscreen, wings, whatever you can name it. And then you're sitting in that car in hopefully a nice comfortable seat, all buckled up. So you're actually getting a lot of feedback from a lot of parameters. However, when you're driving in the virtual world with just your steering wheel, which has a force feedback built in, hopefully, you're only getting sensations that are translated from the softwares. So what you're trying to do naturally is actually amplify some of those feedback features in order to get a better sensation. I'm actually against amplifying a lot of parameters because it kind of takes away the real feelings of the cars you're supposed to feel. See, when you amplify a lot of these parameters, let's say the road detail, you know, the car movement and the curbs and everything, you start basically losing the real feelings, which is actually the car itself. The car and the tires, how much contact do we have with the road, how much weight is transferred to each tire, and how is actually the car handling itself. So therefore, when I actually adjust my force feedback settings on my wheelbase, I really try to concentrate on the tires and how I actually get a feedback from the tires with regard to how much grip each one has. And that is mainly defined by the vehicle's weight transfer. Can I feel the vehicle's weight transfer from the force feedback? I know some of you are actually very keen on getting those details amplified, like the road surface, curbs and rumble strips, but honestly, from my experience, even though force feedback is kind of subjective, I'm going to be a bit objective due to the fact that I have some experience both in sim racing and in the real world. I mean, I've driven anything from a go-kart to a Formula 1 car. I've raced in GP2s, LMPs, you know, some GT cars, whatever. But all I can say is, yes, rumble strip, curbs, road surface are important, but the things you need to focus on are definitely the vehicle's handling and the weight transfer. If you try to achieve the good sensation you want to have from these little details such as road surface, curbs and rumble strips, then you're basically going to amplify, guarantee you're going to amplify the other feelings as well, which could lead to clipping, which we don't want, and also some unwanted frequencies that your steering wheel or your wheelbase may not be able to handle. As I said, force feedback is subjective. It all depends on what you're looking for with respect to the feedback you're getting from the wheel, but in order to actually improve your driving, I basically mentioned earlier the things you have to focus on. At the end of the day, if you're using your simulator for fun purposes, it's a different story. If you're using it for training purposes, it's a different story. Or if you're actually using it to prepare for a race or for the real world, it's a completely different story. Honestly, from my experience, I like to feel the steering wheel as real as I can or as I want, basically. And in addition to that, get most of the feedback with respect to the vehicle's handling, so I can actually drive it in the most fun and best way possible. I mean, for these very obvious reasons, as the things I've just listed, you know, my force feedback settings may not be suitable to you, or vice versa. And also, we shouldn't really forget that force feedback settings do vary hugely depending on the software, the brand, the simulation you're driving in, and obviously the vehicle, the circuit. You know, that's why we kind of recommend to actually have a force feedback setting for each simulation and mainly also each car as well. So one of the first things I actually want to mention before I do like a deep dive into the force feedback and how much you need in the settings, I must emphasize seating position. Seating position is probably one of the most crucial things in order to actually turn the steering wheel with the least effort and get the most feeling from the force feedback itself. So I always recommend people to have the grip heights similar to your upper pecs, your shoulder height, let's say, not too high, but you know, your mid shoulder, no lower than your lower pec, because I mean, it's a known fact that most racing cars, you sit in this position, most single seaters, you sit in this position, and it's probably, you know, over these years been proven that this is probably the most efficient way of driving in terms of using, I think, these 12 group muscles in the best possible way. So once you actually have the correct position, please have good grips. You know, if you need to, use gloves to get a better grip, because I remember when I was racing in GP2, one of the first things I used to do was actually put kind of sticky grip on my steering wheel. So when I was actually holding the wheel itself, I would hold it with least, let's say, stress as possible, least effort as possible, so I actually got most of the feeling through my hands. If your grip is slippy, you have to kind of make more of an effort of squeezing the wheel itself, which can lead to a lot of discomfort and not being able to actually feel everything you need. Now I want to go over the procedure on how I actually adjust my force feedback settings. Well, my dear friends, it's really trial and error. I go on the circuit and basically adjust every single parameter and see what kind of feedback I get, you know. Because as I'm driving now the SimRagic, you know, Alpha U, it was something I wasn't too familiar with when I first started using, so I had to understand what the software did, whatever parameter I changed, you know, what kind of difference it made. Obviously through experience I kind of know to which direction I have to go, but every software is kind of different in their own way. Some have more, you know, advanced settings, some have less advanced settings, but at the end of the day it is all about trial error. So once I get the factory settings, you know, recommended by the brand itself, I go on the circuit and, you know, at low speed, let's say about, you know, 50-60 miles, I just turn the steering wheel. I'm trying to understand the friction involved. I'm trying to understand how much inertia is involved, like basically trying to see how much return, how much spring there is in the steering wheel itself, and basically, you know, I change or I adjust it according to what I want and what I feel. If it's too loose initially, I adjust maybe a little bit of friction to give that certain weight, that constant weight. As I'm turning, you know, once I've got my wheel maybe more than 45 degrees, I want to see what kind of speed it continues at, what kind of weight it continues at, and then I basically, you know, change my inertia according to that. Then basically once you start understanding the weight involved, then you're basically looking into the little details as you're turning. You know, as the tire itself is turning, it's rotating. If you start feeling a bit of slip, then you start feeling a bit of the force feedback changing. It gets a little lighter, it gets a little heavier at times, depending on how much grip you got at that time. So then you start adjusting a bit of damping as well. Like, okay, you know, I want to feel raw feedback, you know, coming from the engine of the game itself. But at the end of the day, sometimes too raw detail can be misleading and actually can affect you in a negative way. So once I've done my slow speed stuff and a bit of damping, I speed up a little bit, you know, actually force the car to rotate in certain ways. Obviously I couldn't rotate now because I couldn't make a turn, but anyhow, so, and you hit some of the curbs every now and then as well to see what's happening. But once I start playing with the car at medium speed, medium to high speed, I'm trying to understand how the car is rotating and if that's actually translating correctly to the wheel, because I can see the car turning on the screen. So I'm basically trying to relate what is happening on the screen to what is happening on the wheel itself. And once I basically get these details sorted, these, let's say, rough details, then you're looking into fine detail basically whilst driving. So when I basically force the car into understeer. When I force the car into understeer, do I lose? Yeah, like basically I'm forcing the car. So the rear end came out, and basically straight away I have opposite steer. But something you need to really, you know, hear me out with this opposite steer as well. If your wheel return speed is very high, yes, you'll probably catch a slide very quick, but it's not natural. I mean, yes, it's not natural for me. It may be natural for you, but you know, at the end of the day, I'm not drifting. I'm basically driving mainly on road courses on the tarmac with racing cars, and I have an idea of what kind of wheel return speeds I'm expecting. Okay, things may be a little bit more on steroids when you're obviously driving a single seater, but yeah, you know, again, high return speeds can affect your driving because it becomes, in a sense, that it's actually directing you not directing the wheel or the vehicle itself. So the steering wheel is actually, or the outputs from the game are actually more in control of you. So that's actually pretty much all the things I want to talk about. And you know, please try every parameter, you know, 0%, 10%, 20%, go up to 50%, maybe even like 70, 80, whatever it is. But you need to understand exactly for yourself what each parameter does. Yes, there's always a information, you know, this question mark thing on the menus telling you what it does, but I'm telling you, my friends, please learn for yourself and try for yourself. So the real question is, how much torque do we need for my wheelbase? What kind of force feedback strength, let's say, torque value do we really need? It probably does depend a lot on your budget, but from my experience, you know, I've driven anything, or I've driven with anything up from like the 2 to 3 Newton meter Logitech, you know, G29 Thrustmaster T150, whatever, up to the SimracCube 2 Ultimate of 32 Newton meters. And you do kind of know when you're starting to get tired, what kind of feedbacks are kind of actually, you know, wearing you out. Because the most important things, my dear friends, is actually not to get tired and actually drive with the wheel or a setting or a strength that is comfortable for you. People do recommend higher Newton meters because of the amount of detail you can get at lower values, lower torque values. If you're driving a smaller, let's say, wheelbase, or you know, even a belt-driven or a gear-driven wheelbase, you know, you're not going to really get more than 5-6 Newton meter, and you know, after a while, maybe that kind of value does satisfy you, but there's always more of a tendency to go into clipping because you're, you know, always asking for more. Just talking about clipping, one of the things I actually forgot to mention with respect to the force feedback settings is please when you adjust the strength of the wheelbase from the software itself, from the brand software, always do between 90 to 100%. So what I'm trying to say, give everything you can from the wheelbase's software, and actually funnel it down, or actually, you know, lessen the amount, or use basically the simulation software as an amplifier or a de-amplifier to basically tame the wheel down. Currently, I have the max torque on 23 Newton meters on my SimMagic Alpha U, and what I do in the game is I pretty much bring it down to, let's say, 50, 40, 60% depending on the vehicle or the track I'm driving on. So from my experience, as I say, I've driven a lot of cars and race cars, different series. For the heaviest wheel I've actually felt was probably either the GP2 or an old spec Formula 3000. And trying to remember what it felt like, I honestly don't think it was actually any more than 15, 16 Newton meters. And obviously, you know, when you're driving at those high torque values, it can get tiring, but obviously you train accordingly. Currently, you know, I'm 40 years old. I mean, I haven't driven professionally for a long time, at least in a single seater. I'm relatively fit. I work out 4 to 5 days a week, and I keep myself in shape. And, you know, even now when I'm trying to drive at those values, yeah, let's say constant torque values, it can get tiring. I'm not talking about peak values. So from what I've basically gathered over these years, I can pretty much say that maybe in terms of peak values, the most you're going to need is maybe 13, 14 Newton meters, and I think your comfortable driving value should be maybe between 6 and 9, because I think those certain values are heavy enough to actually get a good feedback, get a good feeling, and light enough not to get tired. I mean, to give you a very simple example of actually the forces required to turn a wheel at those torque values, let's say I'm driving with a 30 centimeter wheel, and let's say I've got a torque about 12 Newton meters. So if you think about it, if you do some very simple maths, the amount of weight you're actually lifting with one hand at that point is around 8 kilos. It may not sound a lot, obviously, when you divide that by 2, because you've got 2 hands, one's pushing up, one's pulling down, you know, you're rotating in a direction, it's 4 kilos each, let's say. It may not sound a lot, but when you're doing it for a long time, and there's constantly that kind of torque, you know, resisting you up and down, up and down, up and down, it can get tiring. So let these, you know, kilogram values not mislead you, please. I may have completely bodged that maths up, but I just pretty much came to mind right now, and I was trying to give you a simple analogy of actually how much weight you're lifting whilst turning the wheel. Anyhow, from what I've read, you know, some also academic scripts as well, that you're using about 3 to 4 Newton meters whilst driving on a road car, which is obviously has power steering, but most actually race cars have power steering these days. Most actually, you know, road cars, Formula 1 cars have power steering. Yes, the lower tier Formula cars don't have power steering, but, you know, obviously most cars do have now. And coming up to, let's say, the GT4, GT3 category, then you're kind of looking at the 6, 7, 8, 9 Newton meter range. And I think that's pretty much the most comfortable range to drive with. I don't want to be repeating myself constantly, but, you know, I've got 23 Newton meters available from the wheel, but I'm not using it all because, as I said, 1, I don't want to get tired, and 2, I want to feel the details. So the reason I'm actually saying this is because if you start putting a lot of strength into the wheel, trying to turn it or resist it, then you're basically using so much of your muscles for brute force that you don't have any of those feeling left. So, you know, you get feelings in the inside of your palms, you get the feelings in your biceps, triceps, you know, shoulders, delts, rotary cuffs. But when you're resisting too much force, you can't actually, you know, get the necessary feeling. It's basically, I'm just going to compare this to, you know, lifting a weight, a heavy weight, once or twice. You can't really control let's say you're doing a bench press and you got a very heavy weight for yourself. You can basically control that weight. One's completely up, one's completely down. You can't really adjust. You can't, you know, do it halfway through, then, you know, 20%, 40%. You can't do that. But with a lightweight, you can do it much, much easier. Then you're probably going to tell me, so, okay, you're recommending, you know, anything between 7 to 10 Newton meters for a wheelbase. So is that sufficient? Yes, it can be sufficient, but you may encounter some clipping on the way as well, because the last thing you need, let's say you're driving a single seater with high downforce, you're going through a high speed corner, you got a low weight on the wheel, and you hit a curb, or you basically lose the rear slightly, And at that point, you need a peak force feedback, which you may not actually feel whilst driving because there's clipping. And if you have a wheel that is maybe limited to, let's say, 6, 7, 8 Newton meters again, the force feedback sensation you're going to get at lower Newton meters also may not satisfy you. So maybe a little rumble strip or a little, weight transfer equates to, let's say, 2 or 3 Newton meters, but that's not enough for you because you're not feeling it. Then what do? You basically amplify things again to get that feeling, but then again, when you start hitting higher, or when you're actually in a position that you are getting or requiring a lot higher torque values, then again, you're going to hit clipping. But when you're using wheels that have an output of very or higher Newton meters torque values, I'm going to say anything over 16, let's say, then you don't really worry about clipping, and you can pretty much use the whole range, anything from 0.1 Newton meter to 16 Newton meter, and pretty much spread the force feedback detail according to your liking. And of course, if your budget allows you to, we do obviously recommend you using, let's say, wheelbases with higher torque values as well, something in the 20 plus Newton meter range, because when you're actually only using 15 out of 20 or 15 out of 25, you're putting a lot less strain on the motor itself, which means less wear and tear, less heat, and probably even finer detail. Basically you're actually utilizing the dynamic range of the wheel much better. So to conclude, if you're a hardcore sim racer and if you're relatively in shape and really are looking for a good sensation, a good feeling, let's say a realistic feeling, I would recommend, wheelbases within the 15, 16 Newton meter range. Any higher, obviously better. If you're maybe a little weaker, you don't want to put too much strain on yourself, the 10, 12 Newton meter obviously range is pretty sufficient for you as well. And obviously if your budget doesn't allow, or you don't actually need that kind of force, definitely you can go for less, especially if you have, kids or children driving your direct drive wheels or even your wheelbase. Please be aware of that as well. Because, there are stories that, in the past that, wheelbases have injured people, and obviously we don't want that happening to anyone right now, especially our kids or children. But before I wrap this video up, I want to again mention a few things. Seating position, please arrange it well at shoulder height, good arm angle here. Grip, very important. Use gloves if you have to, or use an over grip from a tennis racket or something, just to have that good feeling, and make sure you actually are in control of the wheel, or not vice versa. With respect to the software, please change everything many times whilst driving to actually understand fully what the software does, and when you change a certain parameter, what kind of feedback change you get. Because at the end of the day, force feedback, as we say, is subjective, so you personally know what is best for you and what you're actually looking for. Well, that's it for us today. Hope you've liked the video. Hope it's actually been enlightening for you. And if it has, please press that like button. If you have any comments or questions, please do write them below. I guess I will see you in the next video. But until then, bye-bye. Take care.